I listen to the radio quite a bit when I'm driving, when I'm going to see someone in the hospital or going somewhere, and I'm kind of in between radio stations right now. It's a bit of a tough time for me. I'm having a bit of grief. And so at the moment I've switched over to CKUA, which is not a bad choice. It's the historic station in Alberta. And as a result, I'm hearing all kinds of new music that I haven't heard before. And one song kind of absolutely riveted me this week. It riveted me for reasons that made me sad rather than reasons that made me glad. I want to talk to you quickly about that song that I heard and then shift over into this message that is more positive today about how it is that we are called to establish the kingdom here and now. How many of you heard of Amy Winehouse? Yeah. Marvelous singer, one of the great gifts in the last 10 or 15 years. Amazing singer. First time I ever heard Back to Black, I had to pull the car over. And the song I was listening to this week was actually not Back to Black. It was a song I hadn't heard before. Some of you may have known the song, You Know I'm No Good? Yeah, and in the refrain she says this: I cheated myself like I know I would. I told you I was trouble. You know that I'm no good. And she says that 6, 8 times in the course of this song. I looked up the video, and the video is riveting as well. She was a very small woman, but she had that gift of the large eyes and the kind of mediatic presence. So I don't know how tall she was actually, but I imagine her as being about like this, and she had these dark eyes and this powerful presence, and she teetered around on her heels, and she looked as if she was fragile enough to blow away in a puff of wind, and yet she had this kind of rock-solid heart. Of course, the tragedy of Amy was that Amy was a victim of her own alcoholism and her own drug use. And so the story we hear of her is the story that she sings in her songs. She sings absolutely without any concealment of her struggle. Rehab being one of the other songs that is absolutely pretty hard to hear in many, many respects. And I thought to myself, here we are dealing with a kind of a section of humanity that is tragically in the dark and unable to see a sense of hope, unable to see a sense of new beginnings, unable to see a sense of any kind of life beyond this life of pain. Now, I will be the last person in the world to diminish or to downplay the struggles with alcoholism. I haven't shared with everybody in this congregation, but today's as good a day as any. I have alcoholics liberally sprinkled among my family. My grandfather, as far as I know, my great-grandfather, and my own father. My father, thanks be to God, was able to start a new life thanks to AA. And when he died, he had been, I believe, 28 years sober. And one of the things I had to learn at a certain point was to stop saying that I am the children of alcoholics, but to say, I am the second generation of sober people. Turn it around. So I'm not going to say that Amy should have snapped it all together and pulled herself together. No, I think the tragedy of Amy's life was that she tried very hard. She tried in any number of different ways. She had loving parents. She had people who cared for her. She had people who were aware of the pain that she was suffering. And yet, despite this, she succumbed. And she had no support system that would allow her to be anything other than alone on that final day of her life. So I heard that song and I thought, here we are talking about humanity, talking about people who suffer. And these are not different stories than when we look back at the early days of the gospel. Times were not easy for early days in the gospel either, for people who were called to follow Jesus. What I am struck by when we read that scripture today is how fast the story was. And he called to him, he called his first disciples, and they stopped what they were doing and they followed him. They stopped what they were doing and followed him. I think this is the opportunity that we have, is to stop whatever it is that we're doing that is not helping us and turn towards a sense of a loving presence, a loving God who walks with us, who cares for us, and who is there with us in our times of struggle. I was thinking about maybe 3 different qualities or 3 different steps that one might take in terms of starting this journey. And they are these. First of all, it's community. Building community and practicing community. I think that is one of the truly key elements that takes us away from our own pain and our own struggles. I know from conversations, and you know from conversations with our friends here and with our friends who are not here, there are struggles in our midst. There are struggles that are at times crippling. They are great, great pain that is sometimes characterizing our lives. And yet, when we have this practice of community building, when we have Adrian's, if I must say, absolutely fantastic children's time, animated children's time, we have every one of our young members up here. How can we not feel anything but a sense of God's presence in our midst? There is a sense then of being surprised by joy and being taken away from ourselves in a good way, because we don't want to be taken away from ourselves in a way that causes us more pain, but rather let that pain suffuse almost like, think of it this way. Take a jug of tears. These are your tears that you've poured out. These are these tears of pain that might have caused you grief. And take those tears and pour them out into a plant. That's what we do when we practice community. When we're here together, when we're sharing, when we are one voice, following a sense of mission together, then our own tears don't hurt as much as they might otherwise. So building community. I want to talk about, and it's funny, I was searching for a word. I didn't come up with quite the word I wanted, but I'll start with this one, and I'll work around it. The word optimism. I started with happiness, and that wasn't quite the word I wanted, but it's what we do after we practice community. It's the kind of orientation towards the sun. So that I joked around with you this morning, saying we could have been there under our covers. If you ever talk to someone who suffers from depression, you will know the terrible weight that can fall upon their shoulders, and the sense that the world is clothed in cotton batton and grayness. That where others see sun, all they can see is a sense of kind of like Coke bottle glasses. If you look through the glasses, all you see is just kind of dim shapes. What helps us, I think, to get away from that is this literally orienting ourselves to the sun. And of course, I'm using that as a metaphor to talk about orienting ourselves to that which gives us a sense of strength and pleasure. Now, happiness and optimism are not simply a matter of this. Again, it's not like poor Amy or my father or anyone else who struggles with addiction. It's not like that, where you can just kind of snap it away. What it is kind of a tilling of the ground, or I could say preparing those rows for the seeds, and then sowing the seeds, and then watering the seeds. In other words, step-by-step process. What we find, and there have been studies on happiness is practiced and best achieved when we are outside of ourselves, when we think of the well-being of another person. that is a simple fact. That as soon as we think less of ourselves and more of another person, then our hearts are broadened. And that, I think, is the condition that we're invited into. So how do we, so however we define this sense of optimism, I think there is a sense that it can call us towards a different state of being than we come with, I should say. Now, the third quality I want to talk about is accountability. And accountability, what I mean by that is being honest with ourselves and honest with each other. There's some beautiful passages in the gospel about setting ourselves straight with one another and saying, if I have differences with my sister, differences with my brother, I will speak to them before I go to the table, before I have a sense of wanting to share in the bounty of the Lord. I will put my differences straight. So our accountability is, first of all, an accountability to, let's call it God. Accountability to God to say, you know what? Today was a great day. Yesterday, not so good. And to not kind of gloss over those times when we fall short. But on the other hand, not to be crippled by those times when we fall short. And this, I think, is our challenge. Because most of us, I've said this before, most of us are pretty good at self-criticism. I said this just a couple of weeks ago about getting, looking in the mirror and so on and trying to give yourself a positive statement. Because it won't help us if we simply say, I've fallen short. What will help us is if we say, I've fallen short, and here I resolve and plan and take steps to do otherwise. My sense is that all of these aspects, building community, of building optimism, of practicing accountability, are found within the practice of the gospel. And when we hear these stories again of the calling of the first disciples, we're invited into exactly that place. We're invited to that place of saying, yes, I will follow. I had an interesting afternoon yesterday. Betsy was with me. We were at, actually most of the day, we were at a special presbytery session, and it was wonderful. It was the principal of the Vancouver School of Theology, Richard Topping, came, and he spoke to the gathered presbyters, and he was trying to give us a sense of optimism for our work, give us a sense that what we were doing mattered, give us a sense of what we were that what we were doing could have a positive benefit. And what he kept reminding us of is that when we talk about good news, we're talking about that's exactly what the gospel means. The gospel translated means good news. And we're invited to share that good news. To share that good news and say, you know what? My life has been changed. And my life continues to change. My life is taking me towards a path of happiness, a path of self-completion, a path of service towards one and others. Now, another thing he said, and I want to really emphasize this today because I think it's important for us all. Sometimes we get stuck on aspects of the good news or aspects of the Bible that don't make sense to us. And I do too. There are certain aspects of the Bible that I trip over, and there are stories about Jesus that, on the one hand he appears this way, and on the other hand he appears that way, and one gospel has it this way, and one gospel has it another. What Richard Topping invited us to do is to, as a practice, not get stuck there. And here's the way he described it. He said that there's a difference between what he called thin Christianity and thick Christianity. Now, when I say thick, I don't mean thick as a brick. I mean, right. I mean the opposite. What he said is that thin Christianity was where you kind of, all you see is the ice on the ground, and you kind of go, well, that's slippery, and you don't maybe see that there are layers. What he said was this, that when we engage as a community, we commit together to saying, let's go deeper. Let's engage with this gospel story. Let's engage with these stories. And if it hurts, if it's a place where it's painful, who cares? Keep going. Keep reading. Keep being in there. And the thickness has to do with a sense of layering of depth, where we say, despite the contradictions, I still stand. Despite the challenges, I know this path has depth and meaning for me. So we in the United Church, I've spoken about us before, last week actually, about the Week of Prayer for Christian Unity, which, by the way, I had 2 great services in the week that I went to that were very good demonstrations of unity. But we don't want to sell ourselves short. We don't want to just sort of say, I have a difference with you, but I can't talk to you about it. Why not actually say, I'm really confused about that gospel. It just didn't make any sense to me. Why can't we invite ourselves into places of patient listening? And I think when we do that, our community is strengthened, and our community becomes vital. Because we're saying to each other, it's a little bit like the family who sort of says, you know what, there's all kinds of things that, mark us as a bit odd, but we are a family. And you say that with conviction, and you stand there, and you say, I will share the good news, and I will share it with all its depth, and with all its pain, and with all its contradiction, and I will still say, this is the best news. This is the way that brings salvation. I'll finish on that point, because salvation is a beautiful, beautiful word that we find sprinkled throughout the First and Second Testament. And salvation is sometimes regarded as, again, another light bulb. I've been saved. What if salvation were a walk up a mountain? What if it were yeah, sure, you start off somewhere, but every time you take a step, you move closer to a sense of encouragement, a sense of strength, a sense of being bonded with one another. So salvation as a verb, to be saved, is to be practicing the community of faith here in this world. I like it that we have landed on this week where we have the calling of the disciples. The very last point I want to share with you is actually a quick story. One of our minister colleagues yesterday was saying that she was talking to one of her church members, and they were having a Bible study, and they were saying, well, here we are talking about the calling of the disciples. And the minister said to the group, and of course we're all invited to become disciples. And the woman said, that's the first time anybody's ever called me that, as if it was the kind of an insult. And what if we were to wear that with pride? What if we were to say, to follow, to submit, to a kind of sense of a path that has brought pleasure, has brought salvation, has brought joy to one another? I know every week we are here together, we have the potential to be changed for the better. Every week we listen to one another. Every week we show patience with one another, a sense of each other's presence and struggles. We are on the way to establishing the kingdom. Share the good news. Amen.